June 1943. New Guinea jungle. Private Jack Mackenzie checks his Austen submachine gun one more time before the patrol. Horizontal magazine jutting left. Folding stock extended. 9 pounds of Australian engineering. The Japanese ambush comes at dawn. Mackenzie squeezes the trigger. 3 rounds. Then nothing. He racks the bolt. Mud and sand pour from the ejection port. His mate fires an Owen gun through the same swamp water. 33 rounds without stopping. 3 weeks later, Mackenzie's battalion requisition officer receives an unusual request. Every digger who'd been issued an Austen wants it replaced. Not with another Austen. With anything else. Some ask for bolt-action Lee Enfields. Others beg for American Thompsons they'd have to buy themselves. One soldier writes in his kit log, "Would rather throw rocks." The Austen submachine gun had been designed to surpass the Owen. Army brass believed it superior in every way. Production was cheaper. Assembly was faster. The design borrowed from proven British and German weapons. But Australian soldiers knew something the generals didn't. When your life depends on 30 rounds in 3 seconds, engineering theories don't matter. Only reliability does. December 1941 shattered Australia's strategic calculations. When Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor and Malaya simultaneously, Australia faced a threat no one had seriously contemplated. The nation had sent its best divisions, the 6th, 7th, and 9th, to fight Rommel in North Africa. Now, with Japanese forces sweeping through Southeast Asia at terrifying speed, fewer than 30,000 trained soldiers remained on the continent. Australia's arsenal reflected peacetime complacency. The submachine gun inventory consisted of exactly 17 weapons, 14 American Thompson M1928A1S and 3 miscellaneous captures. Infantry battalions heading to New Guinea carried bolt-action .303 Lee Enfield rifles designed in 1907. Effective at 600 yards across open desert. Utterly inadequate for jungle warfare at 20 paces. By February 1942, Singapore had fallen. Rabaul was lost. Japanese forces controlled everything from Burma to the Solomon Islands. Australian intelligence estimated enemy units were just 300 miles from Port Moresby and 500 miles from the Australian mainland. General Douglas MacArthur, newly arrived from the Philippines, assessed Australia's defensive capabilities and delivered a brutal verdict. The nation could not defend itself with existing weapons. The jungle fighting ahead would demand close-quarters firepower. Thick vegetation limited visibility to 10 meters. Torrential rains turned battlefields into swamps. Coral dust and volcanic sand infiltrated every crevice of every weapon. Thompson submachine guns, weighing 10.8 pounds and costing £56 each, were effective but impossibly expensive. Britain, desperate after Dunkirk, could spare nothing. Australia needed its own submachine gun. Urgently. Enter the British Sten. Ugly, cheap, stamped from sheet metal. At £2 per unit, it represented the opposite of the Thompson's precision machining. British engineers sent technical specifications to Australia in mid-1941, suggesting local production. Australian ordnance officers examined the Sten MKI with skepticism bordering on contempt. One engineering report noted, "Appears designed by someone who had heard about guns but never actually used one." The side-mounted magazine created balance problems. The rear-loading bolt design left the action completely exposed. Any mud, sand, or water that entered the receiver went straight into the chamber. During wet weather trials at Willstown in September 1941, Sten guns jammed after the first magazine when exposed to modest amounts of sand. Australian manufacturers believed they could improve it. After all, they'd already captured a German MP40 submachine gun, confiscated by customs in 1940 under mysterious circumstances. The MP40's clever telescoping mainspring and folding stock seemed far superior to British engineering. Why not combine Sten production simplicity with German mechanical innovation? The result would be called the Austen. Australian Sten. An improved weapon that married proven designs from both Allied and Axis powers. What could possibly go wrong? The Pacific War exposed brutal truths about weapon design that peacetime testing never revealed. New Guinea's Owen Stanley Range represented perhaps the most hostile combat environment on Earth. Temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit daily. Humidity reached 90%. Rain fell in sheets, transforming jungle tracks into rivers of mud within minutes. Volcanic sand, fine as talcum powder, coated every surface. Saltwater corrosion ate through unprotected steel in days. Australian troops needed weapons that functioned underwater. Literally. River crossings were constant. Patrols waded through chest-deep swamps. Soldiers lay prone in tidal mud during Japanese artillery barrages. A submachine gun that required clean, dry conditions to function was worse than useless. It created dangerous false confidence. The Thompson M1928A1, beloved by American gangsters and military alike, performed superbly in controlled conditions. Its .45 ACP round hit like a hammer. Accuracy was excellent at 50 yards. The drum magazine held 50 rounds. But at 10.8 pounds empty, nearly 14 pounds with a full drum, the Thompson exhausted soldiers during 12-hour jungle patrols. The weapon cost £56, equivalent to 3 months' private's pay. Most critically, the Thompson's tolerances were too tight. Mud in the action meant complete disassembly for cleaning. In combat, that could take 10 minutes soldiers didn't have. The British Sten Mk2 cost 1/28 the price of a Thompson. It weighed just 7 pounds. Production required minimal machining. British factories stamped out 2,000 Stens daily by 1942. Combat testing revealed catastrophic flaws. During the Long Bay trials on September 29, 1941, observed by Army Minister Percy Spender, a Sten Mk.I suffered a premature cartridge detonation. The explosion blew the extractor out of the ejection port with such force it struck an observer standing 15 feet away. When examiners poured sand over a firing Sten, it jammed within 8 rounds. Immersion in mud rendered the weapon completely inoperable. Major Howe, military secretary to the Army Minister, filed a scathing report. The Sten gun is unsuitable for use where even a small amount of sand or mud would be encountered. I recommend its complete rejection for use by Australian forces. The German MP40 demonstrated superior mechanical design. Its sealed recoil spring system prevented debris infiltration. The underfolding stock was more compact than the Sten's skeleton wireframe. Reliability in desert conditions impressed Commonwealth troops who captured them in North Africa. But the MP40 had its own problems. The 32-round magazine feeding from below created balance issues. The weapon was heavier than the Sten. Most importantly, Australia couldn't produce exact copies. German tooling specifications were unavailable. Australian forces in New Guinea by mid-1942 faced Japanese soldiers equipped with Type 100 submachine guns and Nambu pistols. More dangerous were Japanese infantry tactics, close-range ambushes, night infiltration, banzai charges from 10 meters. Australian troops needed volume of fire more than accuracy. They needed weapons that functioned while caked in mud. The Australian Army had already approved production of an indigenous design, the Owen gun. Invented by 24-year-old Evelyn Owen and manufactured by Lysets at Port Kembla, the Owen featured a revolutionary top-mounted magazine. Gravity fed cartridges downward, allowing mud and debris to fall away from the action. Testing in September 1941 showed the Owen continued firing after being immersed in water, covered in sand, and caked with mud. But the Owen had problems of its own. It required 46 precision-machined parts. Lysets could produce only 100 guns weekly. The barrel needed specialized milling. Most frustratingly for Army brass, the Owen was a civilian design, not based on proven British patterns. Senior officers, particularly Major General Milford, pushed for an improved Sten built in Australia. If the Sten's weaknesses could be corrected using captured German features, Australia could mass-produce cheap submachine guns at 500 per week. Production economics trumped combat effectiveness. That calculation would prove tragically wrong. The Austen submachine gun was born from bureaucratic preference, not battlefield necessity. September 18, 1941. Melbourne. Die Casters Limited, a company specializing in die-cast metal components for peacetime appliances, received approval from the Ordnance Production Directorate to investigate improvements to the British Sten design. This wasn't innovation driven by Australian soldiers or combat engineers. This was Army headquarters selecting a contractor that promised cheaper, faster production than the Owen gun program at Lycett's Port Kembla Works. Die-casters' proposal was seductive. Using die-casting techniques instead of machining, they could produce submachine guns at half the cost and twice the speed. Managing Director Frederick Simmons claimed his company could deliver 500 weapons weekly within 3 months. No specialized machine tools required. No lengthy testing period needed. The company had exactly zero experience manufacturing firearms. But they did have captured a German MP40 for reference, the same weapon confiscated by Australian Customs in 1940 and now stored at the Australian Army's Central Inventions Board in Melbourne. Ordnance engineers examined the MP40's cleverly designed recoil spring assembly. Unlike the Sten's exposed spring, the German weapon sealed the mainspring inside a telescoping guide rod. Debris couldn't enter. The underfolding stock was more robust than the Sten's wire frame. The plan seemed simple: take the Sten Mk2's receiver, barrel, and trigger mechanism, proven and cheap to produce. Add the MP40's recoil spring system and folding stock. Include 2 pistol grips for better handling. The result would combine British production economy with German mechanical reliability. W.T. Carmichael Limited of Sydney, another civilian manufacturer with no firearms experience, joined the project in February 1942, guaranteeing geographic redundancy in case Japanese bombers struck Melbourne factories. Development proceeded at remarkable speed. By contrast, Evelyn Owen's civilian-designed gun had faced 18 months of deliberate obstruction from Army ordnance officers who insisted on British patterns. The Owen required ammunition the Army couldn't supply. Testing was delayed for months. Machine tools were mysteriously rerouted. The Austen faced no such obstacles. Major General Milford, Director of Artillery and Owen's most consistent opponent, championed the Austen program. In March 1942, he wrote that the Austen represents a production dream compared to the Owen, and claimed both weapons were now on equal footing for weekly output of 500 units. This was wishful thinking masquerading as procurement policy. Die-casters began production in mid-1942, without the extensive field trials Owen guns had endured. The first Austens rolled off the Melbourne assembly line in July 1942. Serial number 1 was photographed being presented to Army officials. Production ramped up quickly. Proof, claimed military brass, that selecting proven British designs over civilian experimentation had been correct all along. The weapon measured 28.75 inches with stock extended, 20.5 inches folded. It weighed 8.8 pounds unloaded. The 32-round magazine fed horizontally from the left side, exactly like the Sten. Chamber pressure, bolt weight, and spring tension were virtually identical to British specifications. Rate of fire, 500 rounds per minute. Effective range, 100 yards. On paper, the Austen was everything Army procurement wanted. Cheaper than the Owen. Faster to produce than the Owen. Based on Allied designs rather than unproven civilian innovation. There was just one small problem nobody had seriously tested. Would it actually work in combat? Technical breakdown. The Austen submachine gun was a mechanical compromise that satisfied engineers and disappointed soldiers. Precise specifications tell the story of its hybrid origins. Overall length, 28.75 inches 730 mm stock extended, 20.5 inches 520 mm stock folded weight, 8.8 pounds 3.98 kilograms, empty, 10.1 pounds 4.6 kilograms, loaded caliber, 9 by 19 mm parabellum magazine capacity, 32 rounds, Sten pattern, side-mounted, left feeding, rate of fire, 500 rounds per minute, cyclic, effective range, 100 yards, maximum 200 yards muzzle velocity, 1,250 feet per second action, simple blowback, open bolt barrel length, 7.8 inches, 198 mm, feed system, detachable box magazine, left side horizontal. Mounting. The manufacturing process showcased die-casting innovation. Unlike the Owen's machine steel components, the Austen's receiver was die-cast zinc alloy, the same material Die-Casters Limited had used for pre-war car parts and household appliances. This dramatically reduced production time. where machining the Owen receiver required 8 hours per unit. Die casting an Austen receiver took 12 minutes. The barrel was cold swagged, a process that formed rifling through pressure rather than cutting. This saved machining time but produced slightly less accurate barrels than traditional methods. For submachine gun purposes, where most firing occurred under 50 yards, the accuracy difference was negligible. The folding stock came directly from MP40 blueprints. 2 metal struts extended from the receiver and locked with a spring-loaded catch. When folded, they ran beneath the barrel, keeping the overall profile compact. This was superior to the Sten's crude wire stock, which offered minimal shoulder support. The recoil spring system, the Austen's most celebrated feature, borrowed German engineering wholesale. Instead of the Sten's exposed spring visible through cuts in the receiver, the Austen enclosed its mainspring inside a telescoping guide rod attached to the bolt. As the bolt traveled rearward during firing, the guide rod compressed the spring inside the bolt itself. Theoretically, this prevented mud and debris from fouling the spring. Theoretically, the dual pistol grips represented the Austen's main departure from both Sten and MP40 patterns. The forward grip was wooden with horizontal ribbing. The rear grip, housing the trigger mechanism, used black plastic with the same ribbing pattern. This provided better weapon control than the Sten's single grip, especially during automatic fire. The magazine release was a simple catch behind the magazine well. Loading required a tool, a small metal key used to compress the magazine spring. Without this tool, loading 32 rounds was nearly impossible due to spring tension. Soldiers frequently lost the loading tool in combat conditions. The fire selector allowed single shots or full automatic. It was a rotating switch above the rear grip, simple, but exposed to mud and prone to jamming if dirt entered the mechanism. The Austen MK featured selective fire capability, dual pistol grips, and a perforated barrel jacket for cooling. The entire gun disassembled into 8 main groups: barrel assembly, receiver, bolt, and recoil spring assembly, trigger mechanism, magazine, folding stock, and 2 pistol grips. Field stripping should have taken 30 seconds. In practice, the die-cast receiver components fit together with looser tolerances than machined parts. The bolt rattled inside the receiver. Disassembly pins stuck. The recoil spring guide rod occasionally jammed if the bolt was withdrawn at the wrong angle. But the fatal flaw was simpler than mechanical complexity. The Austen was a rear-loading, open-bolt blowback weapon. Just like the Sten. The entire action, chamber, bolt, recoil spring, was exposed to the environment through the ejection port and the gap around the bolt. When mud entered, it surrounded the bolt. When sand infiltrated, it packed into the chamber. When water seeped in, it had nowhere to drain. The sealed recoil spring system prevented spring fouling. But it did nothing to protect the chamber, the bolt face, or the extractor. These components, critical to reliable function, were just as exposed as in the Sten the Austen was meant to surpass. Australian engineers had improved one aspect of the Sten's design while ignoring the fundamental problem. Combat would reveal this oversight with brutal clarity. Now, if you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. We are building something here for people who actually care about the details, people who understand that weapon design isn't about what looks good in procurement documents, but what actually works when lives depend on it. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. The Austen submachine gun entered combat with high expectations and failed almost immediately. The first Austens reached New Guinea in mid-1943. Approximately 300 weapons, serial numbers suggesting Melbourne die casters production, were issued to units in the northern campaigns around Lae and Finschhafen. These were likely field evaluation guns, distributed to gather combat feedback before committing to full-scale issue. The feedback was universally negative. Private accounts from the 214th Battalion describe Austens jamming during river crossings, exactly the scenario the sealed recoil spring was supposed to prevent. The horizontal magazine, identical to the Sten's problematic design, collected mud when soldiers crawled prone. Worse, the magazine catch occasionally released during movement, dropping the magazine into jungle undergrowth. Corporal William Bill Henderson of the 26th Independent Company wrote in his diary, "Traded my Austen to a Yank for 3 cartons of Lucky Strikes. Best deal I ever made. The Yank wanted a souvenir. I wanted a working gun. The most comprehensive combat assessment came from Major Hall, an ordnance officer embedded with frontline units in New Guinea during mid-1943. His report systematically compared the Austen to the Owen, Thompson, and captured Japanese weapons under field conditions. Major Hall's key findings. Our Austen will not fire as well as the Owen after immersion in mud. The need for a magazine loader with the Austen is a disadvantage. The Austen's barrel needs a flash hider compensator like the Owen, the Austen's but is too long. The Owen's top-loading magazine and catch design allows for faster magazine change and more reliable feeding. The Owen is better balanced than the Austen. The Owen has fewer parts and is easier to field strip. The Owen is more accurate than the Austen. At 100 yards, more vibration is noted with the Austen than the Owen. Hall's report diplomatically avoided stating the obvious. The Austen was inferior in every measurable category except production cost. Combat reliability proved disastrous. During formal trials comparing multiple submachine guns in June 1942, the Thompson, Sten Mk2, MP40, Owen, and Austen, the Austen failed to complete firing the first magazine. Multiple mechanical failures included broken springs, feeding malfunctions, and premature bolt closure. The Owen, tested under identical conditions, continued functioning after being deliberately immersed in mud. Unlike the Owen's top-mounted, gravity-fed magazine, the Austen side-mounted magazine required strong spring pressure to push cartridges horizontally into the chamber. This pressure caused feeding issues when mud increased friction. The magazine loading tool, essential for compressing the spring during reloading, became a critical failure point. Soldiers who lost the tool couldn't reload under fire. The folding stock, borrowed from the MP40, was too long for quick handling in jungle vegetation. The Owen's wooden butt stock, while heavier, provided better stability during aimed fire. Australian soldiers, trained on Lee-Enfield rifles with traditional wooden stocks, found the Austen's metal struts uncomfortable and unstable. By early 1944, field units issued Austens were requesting replacements with any other weapon. Some diggers preferred bolt-action rifles to the Austen, a damning indictment of a submachine gun's reliability. Others simply lost their Austens during patrols and claimed enemy fire had destroyed them. Army headquarters initially dismissed these reports as soldiers resisting new equipment. Major General Blamey, commander of Allied land forces, insisted the Austen was acceptable for use and suggested reliability complaints stemmed from inadequate training. Lieutenant General Northcote disagreed. In mid-1944, Northcote, commanding Australian forces in New Guinea, issued a directive that would seal the Austen's fate. All combat units in theatre would be issued Owen guns exclusively. Austens already in New Guinea would be returned to Australia and redistributed to home defence units. This was an extraordinary order. It effectively declared the Austen unfit for frontline combat barely 2 years after production began. The Austen was officially pulled from combat service in August 1944. Production continued briefly. The bureaucratic momentum was too great to stop immediately, but new weapons went directly to reserve units in Australia that would never see combat. Total Austen production: 19,914 weapons between 1942 and 1945. Total Owen production during the same period: 45,479 weapons. The soldiers had voted with their lives. Strategic impact. The Austen's failure had consequences beyond individual weapon performance. The decision to develop and produce nearly 20,000 Austens diverted resources from Owen gun production during critical periods of 1942 and 1943. Machine tools, die casting equipment, and skilled labour were allocated to Die Casters Limited and Carmichael Limited when Lycett's Port Kembla Works were struggling to meet Owen gun demand. Australian infantry battalions fighting in New Guinea during 1942 and early 1943 faced shortages of reliable submachine guns. Some units continued using expensive Thompson guns purchased from America at £56 each, funds that could have bought 5 Owen guns at £10 per weapon. Economic analysis conducted after the war revealed the true cost of the Austen program. Despite claims that die casting would dramatically reduce expenses, final accounting showed Owen gun, £10 per unit, 70 man-hours production time. Austen gun, £8.15 per unit, 60 man-hours production time. The Austen saved less than £2 per weapon, roughly $8 in 1943 currency, while delivering inferior combat performance. If all 19,914 Austens had been Owen guns instead, Australian forces would have gained more reliable weapons at an additional cost of £37,826, less than the price of 675 Thompson submachine guns. The Austen program did produce one valuable lesson: military procurement decisions based solely on production economics, without rigorous combat testing, endanger soldiers' lives. Evelyn Owen's top-mounted magazine design, initially derided by Army engineers as unconventional, proved fundamentally superior to both British and German side-feeding patterns in jungle warfare. The Australian Army would adopt gravity-fed magazines for future weapons, including the F1 submachine gun that replaced the Owen in 1963. The Austen's failure vindicated soldiers' judgment over generals' preferences. Frontline troops had immediately recognized the Owen superiority during 1941 trials at Long Bay and Randwick. Army brass, committed to British design philosophy and skeptical of civilian innovation, had overruled them. By 1944, battlefield reality forced institutional humility. Production and service life. Production of the Austen submachine gun spanned 3 years across 2 manufacturers. Die Casters Limited, Melbourne, primary manufacturer, approximately 13,000 units, 1942-1945. W.T. Carmichael Limited, Sydney, secondary manufacturer, approximately 6,914 units, 1942-1945. Total production, 19,914 weapons. The Austen Mk I remained the standard production model throughout the war. A simplified Austen Mk2 was developed in 1944. W.T. Carmichael Limited reduced part count and increased die-cast components, but fewer than 200 Mk2 guns were produced before production ceased entirely in mid-1945. After withdrawal from combat service in August 1944, existing Austens were redistributed to home defence units, militia battalions, and base security details in Australia. These re-echelon troops never tested the weapons under conditions that had revealed their flaws. Some Austens went to New Guinea Civilian Defence Forces and Papua New Guinea Constabulary units. Others remained in warehouse storage throughout the war's final year. The Austen saw no service in subsequent conflicts. Unlike the Owen gun, which served through the Korean War, Malayan Emergency, and early Vietnam War, the Austen was considered obsolete by 1945 and never issued to combat units again. Post-war disposal was swift and unceremonious. The Australian Army, eager to eliminate an embarrassing failure, ordered mass disposal of Austens in the late 1960s. Nearly all 19,000 surviving weapons were transported to BHP Steelworks and melted down for scrap metal. This wholesale destruction means Austen submachine guns are extremely rare today. Fewer than 100 complete examples exist in museums and private collections worldwide. By comparison, thousands of Owen guns survive, a reflection of which weapon soldiers actually valued. Museums holding Austens. Australian War Memorial, Canberra. Royal Armouries, Leeds, UK. Imperial War Museum, London. Various state military museums in Australia. Current collector value for an Austen in good condition, $12,000 to $18,000 AUD, ironically higher than comparable Owen guns despite inferior historical significance. Rarity commands premium prices. The Austen submachine gun's primary legacy is cautionary, not technical. It stands as a case study in procurement failure, a weapon designed to satisfy bureaucratic preferences rather than battlefield requirements. The Austen demonstrated that combining features from successful designs doesn't guarantee success if fundamental operational principles are ignored. The weapon influenced no subsequent designs. Unlike the Owen's gravity-fed magazine system, which informed later Australian weapon development, the Austen contributed no innovations to small arms engineering. It was simply a less reliable version of weapons that already existed. Military historians note the Austen as evidence of Australia's difficult transition from colonial-dependent to independent military manufacturer. The Army's institutional preference for British patterns over domestic innovation delayed adoption of the superior Owen gun by nearly 2 years, years when Australian troops desperately needed reliable jungle weapons. The Austen's failure validated civilian expertise over military conservatism. Evelyn Owen, a 24-year-old with no formal engineering training, had designed a superior weapon that Army ordnance officers initially rejected. The Austen, developed by the Army's preferred contractors using approved British patterns, failed in every combat comparison. This lesson wasn't immediately learned. Australian military procurement continued favouring overseas designs through the 1950s. The L1A1 self-loading rifle, British, M16 rifle, American, and other foreign weapons equipped Australian forces for decades. Only in recent years has Australia returned to developing indigenous military equipment. Ian McCallum, firearms historian and founder of Forgotten Weapons, assessed the Austen as an object lesson in how not to design weapons, by committee, by compromise, and by ignoring what soldiers actually need. His videos on the Austen Mki and Mk2 have become standard references for military collectors. The Australian Army official history, written decades after the war, barely mentions the Austen. The Owen gun receives extensive coverage, with detailed accounts of its combat effectiveness and soldier testimonials. The Austen warrants 2 paragraphs noting its production and withdrawal from service. This editorial silence speaks louder than criticism. In museums, display placards describe the Austen with diplomatic language, an attempt to improve the British Sten design using German features. The subtext is clear: it didn't work. Perhaps the ultimate verdict belongs to the diggers who carried these weapons. A survey of 39th Battalion veterans conducted in 2011 asked them to name their most reliable weapon. 42 mentioned the Owen gun specifically. Not one mentioned the Austen. Some military failures are forgotten because they are unremarkable. The Austen is forgotten because it was quickly replaced by something far better, and the Army preferred not to discuss why they'd resisted that better weapon in the first place. 29 inches of compromise. A side-mounted magazine. A sealed spring that protected nothing. This was the weapon designed to be cheaper than the Owen. This was the weapon built to please generals who distrusted civilian innovation. This was the weapon that looked perfect in procurement documents but failed in jungle mud. The British had the Sten. The Germans had the MP40. The Americans had the Thompson. Australia had the Owen, and nearly chose the Austen instead. In the end, soldiers made the choice generals wouldn't. They dropped Austens in New Guinea rivers. They traded them for cigarettes. They lost them during patrols and requested anything else. Because when Japanese infantry charged from 20 meters, theories about production economics didn't matter. Only the gun that fired mattered. The Owen fired. The Austen didn't. And 19,000 forgotten weapons melted at BHP proved which one Australian soldiers actually trusted with their lives.